Hi everyone, my name is Carly Fitch-Chinich, and today I will be talking about the movie Whiplash for my case Conceptualization. The movie Whiplash, directed by Damien Chazelle, takes place at one of New York's finest music colleges called Schaefer Conservatory. The main character, Andrew, a musical prodigy, is looking for a role model and mentor to lead him to fulfill his dream to become one of the greatest jazz musicians like his idols Buddy Rich and Charlie Parker. J.K. Simmons, who plays a highly reputable jazz teacher named Mr. Fletcher, becomes Andrew's conductor and role model. However, the way that Fletcher teaches and coaches his students is very harsh and abusive, which leads Andrew to spiral into negative self talk and poor decision making. This film received an abundant amount of attention due to the subject matter of bullying, which is on the forefront in current news and has recently been bringing change to legislation to attach criminal responsibility to the ones who bully one another. Background and synopsis. A student named Andrew Neiman, played by Miles Teller, depicts a hungry, driven jazz musician who wants to be the best at what he does. Andrew's dysfunctional family background consists of a broken family that makes him vulnerable to physical and mental abuse. Andrew's lack of support system is made apparent throughout this film as he navigates his journey to pursue his dream. Andrew reveals to Fletcher that he does not come from a line of musicians and how his mother walked out on him and his father at a young age. Additionally, Andrew is embarrassed of his father's occupation as a high school teacher, which leads to a disconnect within their relationship. Andrew evolves and transitions from a vulnerable freshman, a victim of mental and physical abuse by his mentor, and eventually overcoming the vicious torment of his abuse, improving his self-worth at the end of the film. Assessment of Andrew Neiman. The assessment tool that I would utilize would be the SWOT clinical intake protocol in order to gain a better understanding of who Andrew is. The presenting problem. Andrew is in an abusive and destructive relationship with his mentor and jazz teacher, Terrence Fletcher. This partnership lacks boundaries and damages his self-worth as he struggles to impress and improve his skill as a jazz prodigy. Fletcher has been chipping away at Andrew's confidence by slapping him, which demoralizes him in front of his peers and implements negative self-talk, which can be seen throughout the entire movie. Fletcher even goes as far as throwing a chair and band equipment at Andrew while he is playing to push Andrew's ability to perform. Athletic history. Andrew is a driven young individual who uses drumming as a coping mechanism after his mother walked out on him. His acceptance at the prestigious college known as Schaefer Conservatory validated his self-worth as a talented drummer that gave him the drive to pursue his dream of musical fame. Family and social support. Andrew is being raised by a single dad who he has minimal interactions with. It was mentioned that Andrew's mother walked out on him and his father at a young age. Andrew attempts to hold a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, but ultimately ends up sabotaging himself when he decides to break up with her so that he has more time to practice his jazz music. Health. Andrew is observed as a normal, healthy freshman at the beginning of the film, until he is asked to attend Mr. Fletcher's band. From the initial meeting between Andrew and Mr. Fletcher, Andrew was affected by his first abusive encounter that involved direct accusation and confrontation. The buildup of anxiety causes him to lose his tempo and timing, as well as playing until his fingers bleed. There is no evidence that Andrew's eating and sleeping patterns are disturbed. Andrew's anxiety is shown through his long, grueling hours of practice in order to please Fletcher and stay within his core ensemble. There were also no signs of alcohol or drug use. Important life events. The only important life event for Andrew was the acceptance into the Schaefer Conservatory that was depicted. Changes prior to onset problem. Andrew's routine changed dramatically when Fletcher asks him to join his jazz band. Details of presenting problem. Andrew's musical conductor, Terrence Fletcher, strikes fear into his ensemble and creates a toxic environment where Andrew's peers are afraid to speak out and would rather conform to Fletcher's destructive teaching methods. This is because they are afraid of consequences if they speak out against him. Andrew lacks support from his peers because they are following Fletcher to continue with his methods of teaching to confront him out of fear. Fletcher's position at the college gives him status and superiority that students nor staff will challenge because of his reputation. The consistency of Andrew's problem is a thread through the entire movie and does not seem to improve until the last 2 minutes of the film, when Andrew gets his revenge by standing up to Fletcher while on stage and receives acclamation for his unbridled performance from Fletcher. Performance enhancement skills. One of the skills that I would use would be self-talk. Within the self-talk technique, I would use countering. This technique is basically using our thoughts or the way that we talk to ourselves in an internal dialogue. Countering is a different way to address the replacement thought after a negative thought and helps to address the underlying beliefs that lead to that thought. In other words, countering can be defined as an internal dialogue that uses facts and reasons to refute the underlying beliefs and assumption that led to negative thinking. Williams, page 290, 2014. In Andrew's case, he was consumed with negative thoughts that were relayed to him by Mr. Fletcher. At one point during the film, Andrew was repeating these negative words to himself verbatim while he was practicing. By Andrew practicing countering, he can take the negative thought countering challenge that he thought caused with logic and facts to change his belief into a positive thought. The second strategy that I would use would be a coping strategy. According to Lazarus and Folkman, 1984, coping represents the constantly changing cognitive and behavioral efforts to manage the specific external and internal demands of a stressful situation. Efficient coping strategies would be most beneficial when working with Andrew because he needs to learn how not to overreact to stressors and deal with them one at a time. An incident occurs within the movie when Andrew loses his cool and tackles Mr. Fletcher onto the ground during a band competition. At the time, Andrew had to cope under tremendous stress and was lacking the skills to control his temper during the current situation. Prior to this incident, Andrew had been in a car accident on his way to the band competition. Andrew fled the scene of the car accident in order to make the scheduled performance. All of Andrew's senses were heightened, and he basically hit his breaking point. The third goal that I would implement would be the process goal. Would be goal setting. So the process goal. The process goals are even more under the athlete's control than is a performance goal, and can be defined as how an athlete performs a particular skill or executes a certain strategy. Process goals typically focus on practice or training, and an example of process goal may be for a batter to keep his eye on the ball. Over the movie, it is shown that Andrew is very determined and is very goal driven in order to seek Fletcher's approval. Theory. The cognitive appraisal theory by Lazarus and Folkman, 1984. According to Lazarus, the effects that stress has on a person is based more on that person's feeling of threat, vulnerability, and the ability to cope than on the stressful event itself. In the article titled Summary of Lazarus and Folkman's Theory of Stress, Appraisal and Coping, written by Joko Guanman, defines psychological stress as a particular relationship between the person and the environment that is appraised by the person as a taxing or exceeding his or her resources and endangering his or her well-being. Guanman, no date. This theory would be beneficial to provide Andrew with coping strategies to help him deal with his self-worth and negative environment. The second theory would be protection motivation theory, which provides conceptual clarity to the understanding of fear, appeals, and persuasive communication within an emphasis on the cognitive process, meditating behavior change. Andrew is a perfect candidate to become involved in self-destructive behaviors because of the current threatening situation he is subjecting himself to in his environment. Andrew is consistently being put down by his professor, both physically and mentally using this theory along with the coping strategies with Andrew will allow him to build confidence and learn how to utilize preventing this behavior. Counseling psychology skills. I'd like to use the Adlerian therapy application. In the book titled Theory of Practice of Counseling and Psychotherapy, written by Gerald Corey, goes on to mention how the Adlerian therapy application is a therapeutic relationship and assists clients in developing awareness, which leads to making changes in behavior and thoughts. The 4 principles of the Adlerian theory is to establish the relationship, build trust and rapport, assessment of the client, encourage to assist self-understanding, and assist in client making choices, which leads to behavior change. Corey, 2009. This will help create a checklist for me to assess Andrew's needs, challenges, and strengths, and allow me to lay a solid foundation of trust between us. I would also use open-ended questions. The use of open-ended questions will allow me to discover more details about Andrew and his background. Such questions would expose deeper insight as to why Andrew felt the need to consistently subject himself to Fletcher's abuse. I would also want to dive deeper into his mother abandonment and see if there might be a possible connection as to why he consistently seeks approval from Mr. Fletcher. I would also show them empathy. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feeling of another. I would also show empathy towards Andrew when working in our session throughout comforting affirmations. Active listening skills consist of recognition and clarification of what the client verbally is expressing to me during our session. When working with Andrew, I would be very aware of my body language and make gestures to make sure he realizes that I am being sincere when he divulges very personal information to me. I would also paraphrase what he tells me so that he knows that I'm hearing exactly what he's telling me. Multicultural considerations. When considering Andrew's home environment and background, it is obvious to see that he has had to learn to become an independent and take on an adult role far faster than boys his own age. His lack of a strong support system growing up and presently has affected his ability to make healthy decisions for himself. Andrew is a freshman and naive of the expectations that are considered for him, comes from a single-family home, is an only child, low income, lacks peer support, and lacks a positive mentor. Ethics and consideration. The first step is to identify the ethical issue of verbal and physical abuse that Andrew is facing, which is why I would consider the principle-based decision-making, or the 5-step model, Knapp and Vanderkreek, 2012. Then I would explore the way to handle the ethical dilemma as a consultant and review what my moral duty and responsibility is to my client. The second step is to come up with several possibilities to take a course of action in an objective view, and I would make sure to consider the big picture before proceeding. The third step is to consider every avenue of pros and cons as well as advantages and disadvantages. I would refer to the theory knitting to help me decide on the most desired course of action. The fourth step would be to take action in order to ensure my moral obligation and my client's safety. The last step would be my evaluation of following through my decision and reporting the abuse to the local authorities, as well as examining the consequences, both positive and negative effects that would have on Andrew. Evidence-based practice. The concept of self-talk comes from experimental psychology. Self-talk is used in sports psychology to increase performance and can be utilized both internally and externally. There are multiple categories that are grouped under self-talk, which include self-talk valiance, overtness, demands on working on memory and grammatical form, which is proven in this article written by Brown L., Kavana E., and Jones I. In the second article titled Self-Talk in Sport Performance, the purpose of this study was to examine how the athlete copes in response to emotionally abusive behaviors from coach and athletic relationships. More directly, this study explores that the athlete tends to find various coping strategies over time to deal with emotionally abusive behavior. The last study, written by Paulson T., is goal setting. The aim of this particular study was to analyze collegiate athletes and examine their goals. The researchers were interested in the effects of goal setting to improve the performance and include both genders in multiple sports. It was shown that females tend to use goal setting more than males. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for listening.